All right, guys. So, in continuation here of the reactions following the conviction of Derek Chauvin, the Democrats really had some very strange reactions here. Okay, and probably the strangest of them all, right, was Nancy Pelosi thanking George Floyd for his sacrifice. Take a look.
Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice, for being there to call out to your mom. How heartbreaking was that? Call out for your mom. I can't breathe. But because of you, and because of thousands, millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will always be synonymous with justice.
All right, that's weird to me. That's so weird to me, because Derek Chauvin was convicted of murder, which means that George Floyd was murdered. Now, if he was murdered, why is Nancy Pelosi calling this a sacrifice? Okay, because it's not a sacrifice. He was murdered. Sacrifice implies that George Floyd had a choice in this instance in terms of whether he wanted to live or die. Now, I get it. Some people may say he did in terms of resisting arrest and all that stuff. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about whether or not he made the choice to die in that situation. Now, to me, Nancy Pelosi and, her comments just signifies exactly what you think about people like Nancy Pelosi and how they really think about George Floyd. They don't see George Floyd as a victim of police brutality. That's not what they see, right? They don't see him as a human being. They don't see him as somebody who tragically lost his life. What they actually see is George Floyd as a political tool to advance their agenda, right? That's what she sees, okay? And that's why she's thanking him for that. She's thanking him because she was able to use his death to take advantage for political gain. Again, if you don't believe me, Nancy Pelosi's out here wearing kente cloths, her and Chuck Schumer, right? And doing all this kneeling and all this other stuff, right? That is them taking advantage of this man's death, right? It's not like they actually really care about him, okay? And they don't really care about solving the police brutality issue. They don't, because if they cared, they would have worked with Tim Scott and the Republicans when there was a political appetite to do it in order to help them pass a police reform bill. But they didn't want to do that because they would rather people continue to suffer, their argument, not mine. They would rather that happen than to give the Republicans credit, or to let the Republicans take some credit for passing police reform. Now, they can turn around and ignore Tim Scott's bill and pass their own bill and call it the George Floyd Policing Act, right? And try to play off people's emotions as if this is the holy grail of police reform and that their solution is right and the GOP solution was wrong. Even though I think that the GOP solution was more practical, right? At least as a first step. But see, they don't want you to know that, right? And this is how the political game works, guys. This is why she really didn't have that much to say, because she hasn't thought about it that much, right? She hasn't really thought about George Floyd all that much outside of what she can gain from the tragic situation in the first place. Again, this is politics. Leftists are mad at this. People on the right obviously are like, this is Nancy Pelosi being fake, but it's justified. It's justified because that's not what you say in a situation like that. You might as well not say anything at all, because obvious to me that you really don't care, right? It just seems like she was just going up there, saying what she had to say, putting on a show, and that's what came out of her mouth, okay? So the next thing, we have AOC, right? AOC basically coming out and saying that, justice is not done, right? And that they got to keep fighting. Take a look.
So no, this verdict is not justice. Frankly, I don't even think we call it full accountability, because there are multiple officers that were there. It wasn't just Derek Chauvin. And I also don't want this moment to be framed as this system working, because it's not working. And that's what creates a lot of complexity in this moment.
All right, so here's AOC talking about, how they have to keep fighting and, justice is not served yet. And to me, I have to question, like, what do you want, right? What exactly will satisfy you? Because it seems to me that nothing will satisfy these people unless our whole system, everything that we built our country off of, is destroyed, right? Or at the very least, radically changed. Anything short of radical change for these people is not enough. And it's crazy because it's like, oh, we can't let off of the pressure. We can't let off the pressure. It's like, so what are you saying? Are you saying that you're going to keep rioting and protesting in the street? Every time one of these situations happens, this is what you're going to do regardless of the facts and the evidence behind it? Is that what you're saying? Right? Are you saying that you're going to keep going and keep going and going and going until you get your way? And it doesn't matter whose business is destroyed or whose lives are destroyed or what false narratives are pushed in the process? Because it sounds to me like that's kind of what they're saying. And to me, that's an issue. Because at this point now, they was like, oh, we want justice. We want justice. And as soon as you get what you want, oh, no, that's not justice. That's accountability. Not justice, accountability. Which one is it? Really? I mean, the Democrats and these leftists, they love the semantics game. They love to change up the definitions of words to fit their agenda. They love doing that, right? And this is just another example of AOC doing that, right? Just like with the border crisis, where she tried to mix up the word surge and insurgent, even though they have two completely different meanings. They love the semantics game. And finally here, we have Joe Biden, who I think, as president of the United States, really does give the most reckless response to this whole situation. Take a look.
A jury in Minnesota found former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin guilty on all counts in the murder of George Floyd last May. It was a murder in the full light of day, and it ripped the blinders off for the whole world to see the systemic racism the Vice President just referred to. The systemic racism is a stain on our nation's soul. The knee on the neck of justice for Black Americans. Enough of this senseless killings. Today's verdict is a step forward.
So Biden says that this is, about systemic racism. And yes, Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murder. He was not found guilty of being racist. The fact that the Democrats want to associate this with racism and systemic racism is what's causing more division in this country. Okay, it really is. Because I will make the argument that, all disparities are not necessarily something that we should be concerned about, right? Which is why we're not concerned about the disparity that exists in sports, right? We're not worried about disparities that exist in certain occupations like a certified nursing assistant, right? We're not worried about stuff like that. And in regards to the disparity among police use of force and things of that nature, I think that there's still a lot that needs to be explained, right? I think that, we should work towards having a system that's more transparent and empowering these local police departments to collect better data so we can actually come to a definitive conclusion about what's going on. That's what I believe. So when these people always want to talk about disparities and then they want to pin that to systemic racism, that is what drives a lot of division in this country. It really does. Because the natural solution for systemic racism, the natural solution is to take down that system, right? That system that propels the so-called systemic racism. And the people that are going to be victims of that, right, of taking down that system, are not going to be comfortable with that, right? They're not going to be comfortable with that. And being uncomfortable with that is what drives people to fight back and to push back against this whole narrative of systemic racism. And this is why I laugh when these Democrats talk about unity, right? Because you cannot unify a country around the idea that one group of people in this country have significant advantage over everybody else. And therefore we have to take away that advantage, right? We have to make it worse for these people who right now happen to be the majority of people in this country. We have to make it worse off for those people so that these other people right here can be better off. They're not going to get on board with that. They're never going to get on board with it. They're always going to fight back against it. And this is why I don't understand why the Democrats keep wanting to push this narrative. Every interaction with the police, right? If it's a white person and a black man, it's not systemic racism. You can't peg everything to racism. And saying that this situation is a function of systemic racism, I think it's wrong. Because police work in and of itself, whether they're black or white or whoever, right? Sometimes police have to use force. And every time a police officer uses force, that's not racism. Sometimes they're just doing their jobs. Sometimes they're trying to rein in a suspect who is trying to resist arrest, or who is acting crazy, or who is a danger to those around him. That sometimes that's just what it is. That's the nature of police work. But see, Biden doesn't like looking at the nuance and the details. He has to throw a bone to the far left and say, oh, this is systemic racism. And, I'm not sure if they realize how divisive that language is, how that rhetoric really divides people, because a lot of people are uncomfortable with the solution to systemic racism. Because, again, the solution is to take from others who don't feel like they're advantaged in the society. They don't feel like they have all this so-called white privilege that Democrats love to talk about. They don't feel that way, right? They feel like, hey, we weren't born in advantageous situations. We're not rich. We're not wealthy. Why should we make it worse off for us when we're in the same boat as them? They're white people that experience police brutality. And ignoring that, ignoring the reality, particularly for those who are poor and white, has serious consequences. Leaving behind poor white America is what resulted in Trump. That's why Trump became so popular, because poor white America felt left behind. That's the honest to God truth. That's what leads to people like Trump, somebody that comes in and talks to those people directly and say, hey, you've been left behind. The political establishment has ignored you. They've shipped your jobs overseas. Okay? They've screwed you over because you're not talking to them anymore. Who you're talking to now, you're talking to all the people of color. You're talking to the LGBTQ community. You're talking to everybody else while at the same time telling white folks you're bad, and anything somebody white says is an indictment on you personally. Again, this is how you get political figures like Trump to come into a system and disrupt the whole thing. This same type of rhetoric coming from the Democrats. And again, for these people who hate Trump so much, they don't like Trump, they do things that enable people like him to be successful in our political environment. And the irony is really amazing. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.